My name is Rebecca Collins, and I am 35 years old. I am standing at the back of my younger brother Lucas's Navy SEAL graduation on the 4th of July, hidden in plain sight. The sun is bright, the crowd is buzzing, and I am invisible to the people who should know me best. I wear simple civilian clothes, carefully chosen to make me blend in. My family sits proudly in the reserved section near the front, their shoulders straight with pride. They talk about Lucas like he is the perfect son, the golden child who carried our family's legacy. They believe I am the disappointment. They think I dropped out of the Naval Academy, that I failed to meet the standards my father built his life on. For years they have barely spoken to me, as if I am a quiet shadow they tolerate but do not see. I feel the distance even more on a day like this, surrounded by crisp uniforms and polished shoes. My mother beams as she adjusts Lucas's collar. My father claps Lucas on the shoulder with a pride I have never seen directed at me. They look right through me as though I am a guest who wandered into their celebration. The truth they never knew is that I didn't drop out. I walked away for reasons I could never explain. I made a choice that would pull me further from them with each passing year. I stand still watching the ceremony begin, hearing the national anthem swell across the open field. The sound of honor and tradition fills the space, but I stand on the outside of it, holding a story I have never been allowed to tell. People around me wave flags and cheer as names are called. When they call Lucas, the applause is loud, my father's smile even wider. I am happy for Lucas, genuinely, but my chest tightens with a weight I have carried for too long. I shift my gaze to the stage, not really expecting anyone to notice me. Then across the rows of uniforms and salutes, a high-ranking general scans the crowd. His eyes settle on me. His expression shifts from polite attention to sharp recognition. He steps forward slightly, still looking at me, and his voice carries over the murmur of the audience. "Colonel Collins, you're here." I grew up in San Diego, in a house where the Navy wasn't just a job. It was a way of life. My father was a retired Navy captain, and everything in our home was wrapped around that identity. Our walls were lined with old photographs from his deployments, framed commendations, and model ships he had built by hand. Dinner conversations always circled back to naval strategies, battles, and lessons of discipline. My brother Lucas soaked it all in, his eyes bright with the same fire my father carried. Lucas was always the son my father dreamed of. From the time we were little, he walked with perfect posture, spoke with precision, and wanted nothing more than to follow in our father's footsteps. My father never hid his pride when Lucas was around. When it came to me, things were different. My father used to tell his friends that I was smart but not suited for military life. He said I didn't have the discipline, that I was too soft. Those words stuck to me like wet concrete, heavy and impossible to shake. I wanted nothing more than to prove him wrong. I woke up before school to run laps around the block, pushing myself harder each day. I memorized naval manuals and practiced leadership drills on my own. I earned top scores in school and applied to the Naval Academy with everything I had. When I got in, my father gave me one of his rare hugs. It was short, stiff, but I held on to that moment as proof that maybe I was finally good enough. He told me not to waste the opportunity. I didn't plan to. The academy was harder than I ever imagined. I was exhausted most days, but I loved it. I thrived in strategy courses and earned high marks in physical training. I started to believe that I could actually make him proud, but no matter how well I did, there was always this quiet doubt in my father's eyes. He'd say things like, "Lucas is built for this life. Rebecca is still figuring herself out." It chipped away at me. It made me feel like my victories were just accidents, like I was always one mistake from proving him right. In my third year, something unexpected happened. I was approached by intelligence officers who had been watching my progress. They said I had a unique skill set that fit a classified program they were building. The offer came with one condition. I would have to leave the academy immediately and disappear behind a cover story. They told me the easiest story to protect my identity was to let people believe I had dropped out. It was a believable lie. Many cadets didn't make it through, and no one would ask too many questions. I thought I could live with that. I thought my family would eventually learn the truth. I believed that one day I would be able to explain it all. I agreed to the program and walked away from the academy the next week. My father never looked at me the same after that. When I came home for the first time after leaving, my mother wouldn't meet my eyes. She told me Lucas had worked so hard to make the family proud. She asked why I would throw my chance away. I couldn't answer her, not in the way she needed to hear. My father didn't get angry. He just stopped talking about me. When people asked him about his children, he would light up talking about Lucas. When they asked about me, he would change the subject. At Thanksgiving, he would brag about Lucas's training and promotions, cutting the turkey with a quiet pride. My mother would add that it's a blessing when children find their purpose. They would never ask about me. I sat at the same table listening to the weight of my own absence in their stories. When relatives asked about my work, I would tell them I had an administrative job at an insurance company. It was the cover story the program gave me, plain and boring enough that no one wanted to ask more. They would nod politely, give me soft, disappointed smiles, and move on. I was still climbing the ranks in the shadows, still leading missions that mattered. But in my family's eyes, I had disappeared. My father never asked me what happened at the academy. He didn't seem to want the answer. Lucas stayed kind, but even he drifted away from me. He called sometimes to tell me about his new assignments or promotions. He always ended the calls with that same awkward question. "So how's the office job?" I would answer with vague words, pretending my days were filled with paperwork and long meetings. I congratulated him on his success while I carefully hid my own. It became a rhythm I learned to live with. Years passed, and I became good at building walls. I focused on my missions and the lives I was helping to protect. I told myself that was enough, that my family's pride didn't matter. But the truth is, it always mattered. It mattered in the quiet moments when I sat alone after a successful operation. It mattered when I watched other officers celebrate promotions with families who knew who they really were. It mattered more than I wanted to admit. I carried their disappointment like a scar, not on my skin, but inside every part of me. It shaped the way I moved through the world. I became used to being the invisible daughter, the one they quietly stopped counting in their stories. The training in the classified program was unlike anything I had imagined. It started before sunrise and stretched long into the night, grinding me down to the sharpest version of myself. I was pushed to my limits, both physically and mentally, in ways most people would never know. We learned how to process intelligence in real time, how to lead under pressure, when sleep and safety were nothing more than distant ideas. The missions came quickly after that. I went from training grounds to remote locations around the world, where I worked in the shadows, extracting critical information, and leading small teams into places few dared to go. I earned my first promotion sooner than expected, not because I chased it, but because the work demanded it. Each step forward came with more responsibility, more trust, and more weight. The people who pinned the new ranks on my uniform knew my name, but they didn't know my family thought I was a failure. The ceremonies were always quiet, often held in secure rooms with no family section, no photographs, no speeches. I stood there in front of commanding officers receiving awards I couldn't tell anyone about. I smiled and nodded, then went back to the silence. Meanwhile, my family still believed I worked at an insurance company, the kind of job they thought I had settled for. My mother would ask how the office was going, and I would answer with practiced lines about spreadsheets and customer service. I had become fluent in that false language. My brother Lucas would update me about his assignments, his new postings, and the progress he made in the Navy. I listened with genuine pride, but I never told him about the teams I led, the operations I planned, or the lives my decisions had saved. I let him believe he was the only one carrying the family's military legacy. There were moments when I thought I could live without their approval. I told myself the work was enough. I told myself that saving lives and protecting people I would never meet was more valuable than hearing my father say he was proud of me. But late at night, after long deployments, when the adrenaline faded and the mission was complete, I would feel the ache of what was missing. I would think about the empty seat at my ceremonies where my family should have been. I would picture my father standing tall with his arms crossed, never knowing who his daughter really was. I kept climbing. I was promoted to major, then lieutenant colonel, moving faster than most because the classified world measured success by impact, not time. I led operations across continents, including missions that prevented attacks and dismantled dangerous networks. My reports made their way to leaders who would never know the face behind the words. Each success felt both sharp and hollow. I was building a career that mattered, but my family's version of me stayed the same. To them, I was still Rebecca, who gave up, who worked behind a desk, who was too soft for the life my father respected. There was no space to correct them. My security clearance demanded silence. The cover story protected the missions and the people involved, even if it meant letting my own family believe I had failed. I became comfortable with the divide, or at least I thought I had. The distance between who I was and who they saw settled into my life like a familiar weight. I carried it because I had to. I carried it because some stories are too dangerous to tell. Family gatherings became quiet battles I fought alone. I would sit at the edge of long tables while my parents and relatives spoke proudly about Lucas's growing success. His promotions, his new training assignments, his future as a Navy SEAL filled every conversation. My father's eyes would shine when he listed Lucas's achievements, his voice strong with admiration. My mother would softly add that it was comforting to know at least one of their children was making them proud. No one asked about me unless it was to fill the silence. When they did mention me, it was always about the office job they thought I had. They would nod with polite indifference and quickly shift back to Lucas. Sometimes a cousin would lean over and offer to pass along my resume to a small administrative opening in their company. They believed I was stuck in a quiet life filing papers in a low-rise office building somewhere. They offered me favors they thought I needed, never realizing the weight of the decisions I was making for national security. I would smile, thank them, and let their words pass over me like a low, steady rain I had learned to stand in. The hardest moments came when family pride was on full display. I remember sitting at Thanksgiving as my father made a toast about Lucas's dedication and leadership, carving the turkey with deliberate precision. My mother's hand rested proudly on Lucas's shoulder, as she repeated that it was a blessing when children found their purpose. I sat quietly balancing a plate I no longer wanted to eat from. They didn't say it directly, but I could feel it in every glance that slipped past me. In their eyes, I had become the child who drifted away, the one who settled for less. The pain didn't come from their words. It came from knowing I could never tell them who I really was. I could never explain why I missed birthdays, why I disappeared for weeks, or why I always avoided long family trips. I could never tell them that the work I did was saving lives. When Lucas called to tell me he was getting engaged, I was genuinely happy for him. He asked if I would be at his engagement party. I promised I would try, knowing there was always a chance I would be pulled away. The mission order came the day before his party. It was urgent, critical, and there was no one else who could lead it. I left without telling anyone why, knowing the cover story would hold, but the damage to my family would grow. Lucas left a voicemail the next day. He said he understood if I was busy, but I could hear the disappointment in his voice. My mother called later to say it was unfortunate I couldn't make time for family. She didn't sound angry. She sounded resigned, as if she had already stopped expecting anything else from me. In their version of the story, I chose work over them again. They saw me as the sister who never showed up, the daughter who never really cared. In reality, I was leading a high-risk extraction that pulled 3 captured aid workers out of a deadly situation. I sat in a quiet tent halfway across the world that night, listening to the faint hum of radios and the steady beat of my own heartbeat. I stared at the empty screen of my secure phone, thinking about the party I had missed. I wondered if anyone noticed my absence beyond the quick shake of a head and a quiet sigh. This was the life I had accepted. I told myself that the mission was more important, that the work mattered more than their approval. Still, some part of me wanted to believe that if they knew the truth, maybe the story would change. Maybe I would stop being the one they quietly stopped counting. The Thanksgiving table was set with careful tradition. My mother had polished the silver and laid out the familiar serving dishes we had used for years. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house, wrapping everyone in the comfort of routine. Lucas was already there, sitting at my father's right side, his posture straight, his uniform crisp from his earlier assignment. The conversation moved easily around him, weaving through his latest training, his upcoming deployment, and the pride that followed his name wherever he went. I sat across from him, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate, listening to the rhythm of my family's joy. They barely noticed me. When my mother spoke, her words landed harder than I expected. She said it was a blessing that at least Lucas made the family proud. The sentence floated over the table like a quiet knife. My father nodded without adding anything. No one corrected her. No one glanced in my direction. An uncle leaned toward me, his voice low but sharp. He said he had heard about an office opening that might suit me better than my current dead-end job. He said it with the smile people wear when they think they are being helpful, but are actually drawing a line. I smiled back, swallowing the truth along with the cranberry sauce I no longer tasted. I thanked him for thinking of me and said I would consider it, knowing I was leading operations that couldn't be printed on a resume. Lucas updated the table on his next deployment. My father clapped him on the back, proud that Lucas was building on the family's naval legacy. I watched their connection grow stronger, a wall I had never been invited to climb. My mother turned to her sister and said, "At least one of our children understands what it means to serve." She said it softly, but I was meant to hear it. I took a sip of water and let it pass through me like every other quiet dismissal. When the emergency message buzzed on my secure phone, I knew what it meant. It was a pattern I had memorized. Immediate deployment. No delay. No excuses. I stood up carefully, apologizing as I pushed my chair back from the table. I told them work had come up and I needed to leave. My mother didn't even look surprised. She simply said, "Of course Rebecca has to leave. She always has something more important." My father shook his head, not in anger, but in a quiet, tired way, as if this was the final confirmation of what he had always believed about me. Lucas said it was disappointing but typical. I walked to the kitchen, grabbing my coat with steady hands while my chest tightened with something I couldn't name. I kept my breathing, even pressing down the ache rising in my throat. As I slipped on my shoes, my cousin followed me. She asked if the insurance company really needed me on Thanksgiving night. She offered to recommend me for something more stable if I ever got tired of chasing files. I smiled and thanked her again. I wished her a good evening, stepping out into the cold air where I could finally let the silence wrap around me. Driving away, I focused on the mission ahead, knowing there was no one I could call to say where I was going or why it mattered. My family would spend the rest of the night believing I had walked out because I didn't care enough to stay. The weight of it settled into me like it always did. I told myself this was the life I had chosen, that protecting lives came before being understood. I reminded myself that duty mattered more than recognition, but part of me still wanted to turn the car around to sit at that table and tell them everything I had done. I wanted to tell them why I missed birthdays, why I missed this dinner, why I disappeared again and again. I knew I couldn't. I knew the security of the mission depended on my silence. I had practiced this, leaving so many times that it almost felt easy now. But that night as I crossed the city limits, it didn't feel easy. It felt like I had just left a war behind me, one I had already lost. The morning of Lucas's Navy SEAL graduation arrived with the perfect blue sky that always seemed to come with the 4th of July. The ceremony grounds were already buzzing with proud families, flags waving in the soft breeze, and the sharp sound of commands echoing across the rows of chairs. I parked far away and walked in quietly, making sure to stay near the back where no one would notice me. My family sat near the front, close to the stage where Lucas would be recognized. My father sat tall, his back straight, dressed in a blazer that still held the sharpness of his old Navy posture. My mother leaned toward him, whispering something that made him smile, their eyes fixed on Lucas as if nothing else in the world mattered. I stayed in the shadows, just another face in the crowd. I had no intention of being part of their day. I had come because Lucas deserved to have someone there who truly understood what it meant to earn this. I was proud of him. I always had been. The ceremony began with the precision I had known all my life. The marching, the salutes, the reading of names. I watched each step, each tradition, feeling both connected and distant, like a ghost who belonged and didn't belong at the same time. I scanned the stage mostly out of habit when my eyes landed on a familiar figure. Major General Patterson was seated in the front row of the leadership section. She had worked with me on several classified missions. She was one of the few people who knew my true rank and the weight of my service. I adjusted my position subtly, shifting to hide behind a taller man in the crowd. My instincts kicked in. Stay unseen. Stay small. This was not my moment. I kept my eyes forward, my breathing steady, convincing myself she would not notice me here. But as the names continued and the applause rose around me, I felt her gaze sweep across the crowd. Her eyes paused when they reached me. I saw her expression shift, first in surprise, then in recognition. She stood without hesitation, calling out to me loud enough to rise over the voices around her. "Colonel Collins, you are here." The sound of my name, the title, no one in my family had ever heard, cut through the ceremony like a sharp wind. Heads turned. The audience quieted. The weight of that moment landed hard. My family turned too. I saw the confusion ripple across their faces. My father's brow tightened. My mother's mouth parted as if she couldn't find the next breath. Lucas's head tilted in disbelief. I had no words. I simply nodded toward the general, unsure whether to move forward or disappear into the crowd. Before I could decide, another officer who had worked with me approached. He smiled and clasped my shoulder firmly, saying it was an honor to see me here. He thanked me for the mission that had saved his team last year. More officers gathered, offering quiet respect, each one pulling me further into the center of a story I had worked so hard to keep separate. I saw my father's eyes flicker as he pieced together what he was hearing. He was calculating timelines, reviewing the past with fresh eyes, trying to understand who I really was. My mother clutched the edge of her seat, her expression locked between confusion and dawning realization. Lucas stared straight at me, searching for the sister he thought he knew, finding someone else instead. The ceremony continued around us, but it felt like the air had changed. The weight of silence pressed in as the gap between their version of me and the truth finally collapsed. There was no going back. Not after this. Not after hearing Colonel Collins spoken aloud in front of everyone. After the ceremony, I tried to slip away before anyone could corner me. The crowd had started to scatter, families gathering around their graduates, but my family had already begun moving toward me. Their faces were pale with questions they had no way to ask calmly. Lucas reached me first, his steps quick and uneven. He stared at me, his mouth forming words he could not find. My mother stood behind him, her hands clenched, her breath sharp and shallow. My father walked slowly, each step heavy with the weight of a truth he had just started to see. Lucas asked what they meant. He asked who I really was. My mother's voice broke through, asking why no one ever told them. My father stayed silent, but his eyes were locked on me like I was a puzzle he could not solve. I told them I was part of special operations. I told them the dropout story was a cover I had to maintain to protect classified missions. I explained that I had served all these years in a role that demanded complete secrecy. I told them I could never tell them because it would have put people at risk. Lucas's face shifted from confusion to something deeper, something that cracked the foundation of what he had always believed about me. He asked if this was why I missed his engagement party. I nodded, telling him I was leading an emergency extraction that night. There was no time to explain, no way to come back. He rubbed his hand over his face, remembering the phone call he left me that day, thinking I simply didn't care enough to show up. He looked down quietly, realizing the weight of that mistake. I told him I wanted to be there. I told him I always wanted to be there. My mother's voice trembled as she said she thought I had walked away from everything. She said she thought I had settled. I told her I had never walked away from the life she thought I abandoned. I told her I had walked deeper into it than they would ever know. My father finally spoke, asking why I didn't trust them. I told him it was never about trust. It was about security. The less they knew, the safer they were. He nodded a slow, tired nod as if his mind was finally starting to catch up to what his heart could not hold yet. Around us, people continued to celebrate, unaware that something inside our family was breaking and rebuilding at the same time. I didn't ask for their forgiveness. I didn't ask for their understanding. I knew this was not the kind of story that could be fixed in one conversation. Lucas looked at me again, this time with something new in his eyes. He asked if the missions I led were the ones he had read about in the news. I told him some of them were. I told him some of them would never make it to the public. He nodded slowly, piecing together years of unanswered questions. My mother's hands trembled as she whispered that she didn't know what to say. I told her she didn't have to say anything. I told her I understood. My father reached out, resting his hand on my shoulder for the first time in years. It was not a warm touch, but it was steady. I told them I needed to leave. I told them the work would not stop just because they now knew part of the truth. I told them this was not about proving anything anymore. This was about doing the job I had committed my life to. I walked away, not in anger, not in shame, but with quiet strength. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need them to explain. I had learned to live without their approval. But now, for the first time, they had seen me. The road back to my base felt lighter than I expected. I knew there would still be distance between us, still things I could never tell them. But the silence no longer felt like hiding. It felt like choosing peace over performance. I didn't look back at the ceremony. I didn't need to. I knew that something inside my family had shifted. They would carry this new version of me with them now, whether they fully understood it or not. That was enough. That would finally be enough. 1 year later, I found myself walking up the same driveway I had once avoided. The familiar sounds of the 4th of July barbecue drifted through the air, mixed with the faint crackle of distant fireworks. My father stood by the grill, surrounded by his old Navy friends, their hands moving as they traded stories and memories. This time, when he saw me, he called me over with a small wave. He turned to his friends and introduced me, simply calling me Colonel Collins. He said it with the kind of pride I had never heard before, letting the weight of my rank speak for itself. His friends nodded with the quiet respect of men who understood exactly what that title meant. No one asked for details. No one pressed for stories. The title alone was enough. It filled the space that words could not. I took a plate and joined Lucas by the grill, where he handed me a spatula and joked that I had spent so many years away that it was time I finally did some real work. I smiled and told him I had survived worse than his grilling expectations. The moment was simple, but it settled into me like a steady breath. We didn't talk about the missions. He didn't ask. Instead, we joked about the long days, the bad coffee, and the weight of being the ones who carried stories no one else could fully understand. There was a rhythm between us now, a kind of quiet shorthand that didn't need to be explained. My mother walked around the yard checking on the food, her movements lighter than I remembered. She no longer looked at me like a stranger. She called me by name and asked me to help set the table, her voice soft but steady. The small gestures told me more than long speeches ever could. The seat at the table was already there for me, no longer offered out of obligation, but because I belonged. My father handed me a burger with a nod, not as a test, but as a simple shared moment. The distance between us had not vanished completely, but it had shifted. The weight of years spent in misunderstanding no longer pressed down so hard. They didn't need to know every detail of my work. They finally understood enough. Lucas and I stood side by side at the grill, flipping burgers and moving in sync without planning it. He laughed and said he was still waiting for me to burn something. I told him I would never give him that satisfaction. The teasing felt easy now, without the heavy shadow that used to sit between us. As the sun began to set and the fireworks started to light the sky, I looked around the yard and realized this was the first family gathering where I didn't feel like I was pretending to be someone else. I didn't need to leave early. I didn't need to shrink myself to fit the story they had written about me. The quiet respect, the simple invitations, the shared tasks by the grill, all of it spoke louder than the years they had spent believing I was less than I truly was. I had not come looking for an apology. I had come looking for a place where I could finally just stand still. And in that backyard, with the sound of distant fireworks and the smell of summer, I realized I had found it. Not long after that 4th of July, my mother quietly created a small corner in the house that had always belonged to my father and Lucas. It was the room where old Navy plaques, photos, and flags filled the walls, where my place had always been missing. She placed a framed picture of me in uniform on a small table near the window. Next to the photo, she added the few awards I was allowed to share. They were simple, nothing that gave away the full story, but enough to stand in that room with quiet purpose. A folded flag, a certificate, and a small brass nameplate with my rank sat neatly together. She never mentioned when she set it up. I only noticed it one afternoon when I passed the room and saw the small arrangement waiting there like it had always belonged. It didn't take up much space, but its presence filled something that had been empty for years. My father would pause in front of that corner from time to time. He never said much about it, but I would catch him standing there, his arms crossed, his gaze steady on the photograph. Sometimes he would gently run his fingers across the edge of the frame before walking away. The room still held the weight of his own service and Lucas's growing career. But now there was a place for me too. It didn't need to be large. It didn't need to be loud. It was simply there, woven into the story of our family in the same quiet way I had lived my life. I never asked my mother why she did it. I never needed to. Some acknowledgments are more honest when they arrive without words. Some gestures speak louder when they are left to stand on their own. That small corner tucked away but never hidden became the first visible piece of me in our family's home. It didn't erase the years we had lost, but it built something new in their place. It was enough. It finally felt like enough. Looking back, I realize how easy it is to misjudge people. Sometimes we think we know their story because we see a small piece of it. We assume we understand, but often we are only looking at the cover of something much deeper. I spent years living under the weight of labels my family gave me. They thought I had failed. They thought I walked away from the life they valued. They never saw the hours, the risks, or the sacrifices because I was never allowed to show them. It hurt to sit at family dinners where I became invisible. It hurt to hear my name wrapped in disappointment when the truth was I was giving everything I had to a life they could not see. I wanted to explain. I wanted to prove something. But I learned that not every battle needs to be fought out loud. Sometimes the most powerful things we do are the ones no one notices. Sometimes showing up quietly and doing the work even when no one is watching is what builds real strength. Loud explanations can bring attention, but quiet persistence brings respect. People may not always understand your choices. They may judge you, write you off, or create stories about you that are incomplete. That does not mean you have to become what they see. Your worth is not built from their assumptions. The truth has its own rhythm. It finds its way in its own time. Some truths arrive softly, not in the moment you expect, but when the world is finally ready to see them. That is what happened to me. If you have ever been misunderstood or dismissed, I hope you remember that your story still matters. You don't have to force people to understand you. Sometimes it is enough to keep going, to keep living in a way that honors who you really are. I would love to hear your stories if you have ever felt this way. Maybe you have walked through life carrying a truth that no one else could see. Maybe you have quietly proven yourself without ever needing to announce it. Thank you for listening to mine. I hope you remember that the labels others put on you are never the full story. The truth always finds its moment, and when it does, it has the power to change everything.